Today is Easter, the day we commemorate Jesus' resurrection. Jesus was crucified on Friday, body placed in the tomb. Sunday morning the tomb was empty. He had risen from the dead. Many churches have a big celebration on Easter Sunday with loud music, parties, special events and stuff. But that's not what the first Easter was like. If you read in the Gospels, you'll see people were perplexed. They were mystified. They didn't understand what happened. They just didn't know what to think. It was sort of like Christmas. You know, we've talked in here before about Christmas. How we can look at the people that visited the baby Jesus, the shepherds and the magi, and they just marveled and didn't know what to think. That's sort of the way it was on Easter. In fact, our gospel reading today said that they were so confused that they just were afraid. And another gospel account of it says that they wouldn't give because they were afraid. They knew something had happened, but they didn't know what it was. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know what was going to happen next. The first Easter wasn't a big celebration. It was a time when people were mystified, perplexed, and afraid. I wish we could carry over some of that into our own lives. Instead of being so sure of everything, I wish we could be a little more mystified, more perplexed. Of all the things that Christians say Jesus did on earth, the resurrection is the single most important thing. It is the foundation that all of Christianity is based upon. If you read through the Gospels, through the Gospel narrative, you'll see that where they lead is to the resurrection. It moves through the crucifixion to the resurrection. That's what it all moves to. Imagine you go see a movie, you see this plot play out, a bunch of things happen in that movie, and then there's the ending. And when you leave the movie theater, chances are what you take from you as you go back out to your car is the ending. It wasn't so much what happened during the movie, as it was how it ended. That's what you take with you, how the movie ended. So that's the way the Gospels are. It progresses through the birth of Jesus, the life of Jesus, the arrest of Jesus, the crucifixion and burial of Jesus, to the resurrection. And that's where it all leads to. That's what you take with you. That was the point of it all. Now the Gospels speak of Jesus appearing to his disciples and other people after the resurrection. The book of Acts says that Jesus was on earth 40 days after the resurrection. 1 Corinthians 15 tells us he appeared to more than 500 people during that time. We don't know exactly who those people were or what he did, but there are several instances reported in the Gospels. And one is called the incident on the road to Emmaus. Two of Jesus' followers were walking to the town of Emmaus. They came across a man, that was Jesus. They didn't recognize him. Got night, and they invited him to stay where they were staying for the evening, and so he does. He sits down and eats with them. And when he eats with them, they recognize who it is. And they then rush to Jerusalem to tell everybody else. And while they're all there, Jesus appears with them. And everybody's afraid, think it's a ghost. But Jesus said, look at the scars from my crucifixion. He says, touch me to see. And then Jesus eats with them. And so they know it's really him. The Gospel of John tells us that the disciples were hiding together behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jews. And suddenly Jesus was standing there. He shows them the wounds from his crucifixion. One of the disciples, Thomas, was not there. And when the others told him about this, Thomas said, I don't believe it. I won't believe it unless I touch those wounds myself. So a little later, the disciples are gathered. Thomas is there this time. Jesus appears. He tells Thomas to touch his wounds. And at that time, That is one of the most significant places in the entire Gospels. If you will look at Thomas's response when he touches the room, he says, "My Lord and my God." Now John reports another scene. This one sometime after that. Several of the disciples are gathered going fishing, and they fish all night, they don't catch anything. Early the next morning, they see a man standing on the shore. They don't recognize who it is. He yells out and says, "Did you catch anything?" They said, "No, nothing." He says, "Throw it out on the right side of the boat," and they do, and there's so many fish that they have trouble pulling them in. Then they recognize it's Jesus. They go to the shore, and Jesus has started a fire. He cooks bread and fish for them, and he eats with them. Now, all these things are interesting because it tells us that Jesus really did rise from the dead in his own body. The Gospels go to great lengths to be sure we recognize that. There is an aspect of Christianity today that tries to say it was Jesus' spirit that rose from the grave, but the Gospels make it clear the grave was empty, that Jesus had a body, you could touch it. You could touch the wounds. You could watch him eat. All of the Gospels go to great lengths to emphasize that. The real resurrection of Jesus' body from the grave is the foundation of Christianity. If you knock that out, you have nothing left. Nothing left. Now, many times in the Gospels, it is, and in the rest of the New Testament, it is said that in order to be saved, you must believe in Jesus. And that sort of leaves an open question. Well, what does it mean to believe in Jesus? There's only one place in the whole New Testament that indicates anything specific what you have to believe, and here's what it is. Believe in your heart that God raised Jesus from the dead. In all the whole New Testament, the only place where it lists anything that's necessary to believe, it is belief in the resurrection. Why is the resurrection central and not the crucifixion? Some Christians try to make the crucifixion central. A lot of Christians today, the hip Christians, try to make the teachings of Jesus central. Well, why is it that the resurrection is central? It is because in the end, Christianity is not about getting your sins forgiven. It's not about living by certain rules. Christianity is about life. That's what it's about. It's about life. You know, every one of us is going to die one day. Our life will come to an end. Now, when you're young, don't think about it. When you're 15, 20, 25, 30 years old, you think you live forever. I used to think that too. I mean, your horizon just seems endless when you're 22 or 23 years old. You get 65, it's different. you know it's not going to last forever. I never will forget the day, and this was really depressing to me, and I don't remember when it was. And I don't have any idea how long one and I'll live. But there was a day, a time that I thought, okay, our marriage is half over. Because, obviously we're going to live another 50 years. We're not. So, some of us at our age may not have 5 more years of life. And we're all going to die. There's a lot of people that we know right now that are having really hard time. We have one of our neighbors lives about 2 miles from us. He just all of a sudden started having problems, and he's got Lou Gehrig's disease, and he probably won't live for the rest of the year. And otherwise, he was healthy, not all that young by our standards, not all that old by our standards. So we're going to die. And then people will forget us. Your grandchildren will spend all of their money, believe it or not. It'll be like we never lived. And what'll it all been for? Have our lives been easy? Look back on your life. I know a lot of y'all in here, and I know your lives have not been easy. Mine hadn't been easy either. Wanda's hadn't been easy either. I don't know anybody that's had an easy life. Life is hard. Now, some have had easier lives than others, but life sometimes is a downright struggle. And then it just ends, and that's it. Why'd you go through all this if it's just going to end, just to die and be forgotten? You see, that's exactly the question Christianity addresses. Christianity tells us that all this stuff is not for nothing. Christianity tells us to look at our life as being on a journey to what's really important, to real life that lies on the other side. The Apostle Paul said that our true citizenship is elsewhere. We belong somewhere else. We are traveling through here on the way to where we really belong. We see our lives fading away here, but Jesus said we will be received in a place where He is. The author of 1 Peter says that we have a living expectation of an inheritance in heaven. A living expectation. We expect it. We don't think we're going to get it, we expect it. And he says it will never fade away, and it won't decay. God has promised us eternal life. That's what Christianity is all about. Christianity is all about the fact that death is not the end of us. Our lives on earth will not have been pointless. It will have led somewhere. This road that sometimes we've had to claw and crawl and struggle our way down will lead somewhere. And it will be somewhere better than this. Now, sometimes when people think about resurrection, they think of surviving death. But that's not what resurrection is. Resurrection is not surviving death. It is death reversible. The Christian idea of resurrection is not that there is some point of view that will never die. The Christian idea of resurrection is that God reverses death. Today we live in bodies that decay and grow old and fail on us and get sick. God will reverse that, and we will have bodies that will not decay and get old. Today we live in a world in which death reigns. Everything dies. But God will reverse that. We will live in a world where death has no part. The Christian idea of resurrection is transformation. We are transformed into something not subject to decay and death. We are subject to decay right here. We're all decaying little by little here every day. We decay. We're all going to die. But we're going to be transformed to where we're not subject to decay and death. The resurrection of Jesus was not that his body came back to life. It's that he came back to life transformed. We see where Jesus could appear in the middle of a room. We see in the first chapter of the book of Acts how Jesus and his earthly body ascended up into heaven. And that is when he took our humanity into heaven and set that at the right hand of God. And he made us a part of his eternal kingdom. It's a body that never decays, not subject to death, but it is really us. It is not that we are absorbed into some kind of mindless eternity or mindless universal mind or something, but the idea of resurrection says that it is us. We survive. Who I am, I will still be me. You will still be you. You will just be perfected. We will be released from the prison of earth and transformed from being earthly beings into being spiritual and heavenly beings. Paul said, as we have borne the image of the earthly, so shall we bear the image of the heavenly. That's the idea of resurrection. It is transformation from an earthly body to a heavenly body. I know we live in a time and an age when all this stuff sounds like a bunch of myths from the ancient world. We live in an age where science is God, where science has truth, where science is where people turn to. I never will forget, during the coronavirus, one night I was sitting there one night watching TV, getting ready to go to bed, and it came on with a commercial that said, in times like this, we put our trust in the one thing we can always depend on, science. And I thought, my God, but it's true. We live in a world where more than anything else it is science that is leading people away from Christianity. Science tells people all this stuff about resurrection is a myth. There are even psychologists who write articles outlining the various psychological disorders people have who believe that Jesus really did rise from the dead and that we will also rise from the dead. And sadly, many of those are so-called Christian psychologists. There are many people who masquerade as Christians today who believe that Jesus' body did not rise from the dead, that it was a bunch of stories the disciples made up afterwards because they still felt Jesus' spirit with them. And you can read books or watch on TV how Jesus became Christ, how they invented it all. If that's what you want to believe, huh? But if you want to, you can depart from the crowd and assert that Jesus really did rise from the grave. Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If your treasure is in this life, I feel sorry for you because no matter how much money you accumulate or how much treasure you have, you're going to leave it one day. And the people that come after you will squander it. You might try to fool yourself thinking that you're not going to ever get cancer or something. I know people that think they're going to live to be 100-something years old. And if they won't, or if they do, it won't be like they think it is. Just look at the obituaries and see. If your treasure is in heaven, though, the end of this life doesn't matter as much. It's just that that will be you going where you really belong. The book of 1 Corinthians says, eye has not seen, ear has not heard, nor has entered into the hearts of man the things which God has prepared for those who love him. We live in a world where more and more Christianity has backed down in the face of science and has made Christianity all about the here and now, all about social work, medical work, and doing stuff for the poor. That's not what Christianity is about. Christianity is about life. You see, the Bible contains a witness of something that people witnessed 2,000 years ago. They witnessed Jesus rising from the dead. They didn't understand it. They didn't understand how it happened. They didn't know really what it meant. They just saw it happen. They said, we saw this. We saw this. And it changed these people's lives to the point where they could never be the same again. It changed everything. They could never be the same. That was the resurrection of Jesus. They witnessed this. They didn't understand it, but they knew something had happened. The Apostle Paul wrote, we know that if this earthly house is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in heaven. For we who are in this tent now groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up by life. Mortality is swallowed up by life. Death is swallowed up by life. One of the metaphors that is used to speak of Jesus is the metaphor of light. And the Gospel of John says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness is unable to overcome the light. And so does life shine in death. And death is ultimately unable to overcome life. And that is the real message of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Death ultimately unable